Dr. Gibby, I have a better photograph or version of the chest x-ray. I'd just like to show that to you briefly so we can see it. This is Plaintiff's Exhibit 31. Okay. What is the importance of this to your opinions, Dr. Gibby?
This was an x-ray taken the day after his incident, showing a series of images of his ribs. And I think the importance of this is documenting the trauma that he sustained.
Okay.
White bands are the ribs, which are bright on an x-ray because they are denser than made of calcium. And you can see here where the rib is disrupted. There's a fracture here. There's one here. There's one here. So he has, there's one here. So he has a total of 4 fractured ribs along the lateral side of his right chest. And it's over a substantial area, a good 7 or 8 inches across his chest. But I just wanted you to see that these are, they're not subtle. These fractures are displaced, and they occur over a skin.
Dr. Gibby, what's your opinion as to how this crash, these injuries were caused?
I think based on the stated testimony of the defendant, Craig Ramon, who was the only eyewitness, and based upon the pattern of injuries that are present here, what I believe happened is that he was struck from the left side, and that forced him into the ground. It's also been the testimony here that Ms. Paltrow was on top of him at some point, so the combined weight of the two individuals slamming into the ground caused the fracture and the head injury. And I don't think it would be plausible that if he were running into her that he would have broken the ribs on the side of his chest. He likely would have had his arms extended. He would have protected himself. He would have had knees, arms, etc. in front of his chest. And so he might have had other injuries. He could have broken a leg or an arm or a wrist or something like that. But in terms of a frontal collision, had he run into Ms. Paltrow, I don't think he would have had these types of injuries. And I also think, just given the differential in mass of the people involved, I think she would have broken his fall, so to speak, reduced his collision velocity and the impact, and probably had he been the person running into her, I don't think he would have sustained these types of injuries.
Thank you. Does your expertise allow you to make these conclusions like you do?
Yes.
Now I'd like to talk about the head injury again. We went through the ribs. We'll go back and forth. You've examined Terry Sanderson, and it was about 5 years after the crash, correct?
Correct.
What can you tell the jury about how persistent his injuries are and whether they are permanent?
I think the record is fairly replete with examples of where Terry has continued to suffer from some neurologic deficits, both in his ability to focus, his ability to perform tasks, his memory, and especially his interpersonal relationships, emotional ability, anger management and some of those things, which Terry had not had those issues prior to the accident. So I do think his symptoms have been persistent. There is some evidence in the record from his daughter that some of these things had gotten a bit better, that he had improved, but he wasn't back to normal.
Will he ever get back to normal, and why?
You know, I don't know. The human brain has some plasticity to it, but as we get older, our ability to reform neural connections and to improve diminishes substantially with time. And typically, if a person has not regained that function or lost capacity within about 12 to 18 months, they're probably not going to get it back.
Why wasn't Ms. Paltrow hurt significantly in this collision?
Well, I don't know that I have an answer to that. Ms. Paltrow, first of all, the record suggests that she was hurt. She was stiff and sore after the accident at lunch. At least that's what the ski instructor reported. She's much younger than Terry, and therefore probably more capable of that type of collision. But I don't want to speculate. I mean, she could have been injured, yes.
Next, I'd like to refer you to the defense experts. You reviewed their reports, correct?
I did.
And why don't we start with the medical doctors, doctors Black, Edgley, and Hesh. How do you differ, or what is your response to their opinions in this case?
Well, you'd probably have to refresh my memory on some of those opinions, because that's a fairly blanket statement, but I can recall at least some of the opinions of Dr. Black. He had reviewed the imaging and suggested that there was evidence of multi-infarct white matter disease, and there was atrophy of the brain. I don't think in Terry's case there's much atrophy. His cortical gyri, the cortex itself, is still very well preserved for his age. What he has is dilatation of his ventricles. So at least the inner part of the brain looks, the fluid pathways are dilated, but I don't think he has significant brain atrophy, as you might see in someone with dementia or multiple strokes or long-standing injuries. So in that respect, I would disagree with Dr. Black. I do think that Dr. Black discussed the diagnosis of normal pressure hydrocephalus, and I'd like to just say that is a clinical diagnosis, and Terry Sanders did not have any of the clinical symptoms associated with normal pressure hydrocephalus. He had radiologic findings of dilated ventricles, but he had not progressed. He had a compensated hydrocephalus, essentially. But many people have dilated ventricles, and they do just fine. What he clearly did not have were the classic symptoms of normal pressure hydrocephalus, such as problems with his gait, ataxia, for example. If someone is ataxic, they're probably not going to be skiing. He did not have symptoms of dementia. He was a very bright, active, engaged person. He did not have difficulty with urinary incontinence or, urinary problems. So the typical symptoms of normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is usually diagnosed later, I think it was just serendipity that these images found these dilated ventricles, but in Terry's case, I don't think they were causing symptoms, and I don't think they're the primary cause of his current symptoms.